Hey, this is Jonathan Lewis. Welcome to another Stubby episode. Today's episode is going to be a little different in that it's going to be geared more toward those that want to start their own business or have started their own business, and we're going to see where this one goes. So we got a message a while back from a gentleman that pointed out a few things that I think is very valuable to talk about on the Stubby, not just to answer to him individually, but to talk to everybody. And that is that we might be leaving the impression, specifically me here, leaving the impression that before you start your own business or before you go full time, that you would need to have like $500,000 in the bank, a year's worth of backlog, a year's worth of work, but that's guaranteed, and a spouse that makes really good money, so that you have something to fall back on. And I don't think that that's the case, but I want to address that and a few other points here for this episode. As I look at what this gentleman wrote and some of the points that he make, I think it's very valuable to talk about. I think it's very valuable for us to understand that I don't necessarily think that that's the case. And so I want to use myself as this example in these examples, I should say, and just kind of go from there. First off, before we dive any deeper, I'm not saying any of this is legal advice. I'm not saying this is what you should do. I'm just telling a story more than anything and sharing a few things that we did and how we made some of the decisions we did to jump full-time into superior welding. Your mileage might vary, your story is going to be just a little bit different. I've said before that we want to share a little bit more of the numbers, and so we're going to share some of the numbers, not all of them. This is a short episode, or supposed to be, and hope that some of these numbers can help you in making your decision. If you're right at the edge of the airplane, ready to jump out with your parachute, again, I just hope that this can help you. So let's first address the, starting your business, or not starting your business so far as jumping full-time, unless you've got a wad of cash in the bank and a bunch of work lined up and maybe a spouse or whoever that might have a really, really good job to fall back on. For us, I wouldn't say that that's something I would say for everybody, for sure. When we were looking at jumping into Superior full time, I believe we wanted to have like $10,000 or $15,000 in our company account so that we could fall back on or in our personal account. And we had a goal and a number in mind that collectively that we could use to fall back on. And what it really amounted to was like 3 or 4 months, maybe 2 or 3 months of expenses, not everything, but just bare bones expenses before we jumped full time. Made us feel good. Something we still do to this day. We have X amount of months of expenses, so if something goes wrong, we have some cash to fall back on temporarily. So as far as the work itself, being lined up, you've got to project ahead the best that you possibly can. I can't give you the answer for that. For us, we looked ahead and we thought and we hoped that we had several months of work and we figured out what that money would be, and that's how we made the decision and made the leap going into Superior full-time. I would not say to jump into a welding business or any business for that matter with no work ahead of time, but that's just me. That's how we did it. Again, your mileage is going to vary. Whatever you decide you want to do, that's ultimately your decision in the end. And so far as a spouse having a really good job, I really can't speak to that, or to give advice. I don't feel that that's something necessarily I would have to do. But again, if that's a safety net, then there's nothing wrong with that as well. So overall, I'm trying to say is you don't necessarily have to have $1 million in cash before you jump out full time. But I think you do. At least we did. We wanted to have some reserve to make it a little bit easier, and we still carry that, as I said, to this day. It was also brought out to us that we might take the wind out of some of these guys and girls' sails with some of the advice that we give, being a little bit too cautious in our advice and not being, risky and sharing advice that would be risky. Obviously with that and sharing things that would be more risky, obviously it gets into legal stuff and we don't want to get in trouble. We don't want you to get in trouble. And so we share advice based off of A, our experiences, or B, our opinions based off of our experiences and everything. So all we can share is where we're at in life, and what we did or what we think we would do in certain situations. And again, I don't want to take the wind out of your sail. I don't want to be, I don't want to be the one, neither one of us, Roy, Jody, none of us want to be the ones to take the wind out of your sail if you're looking at jumping into a business that doesn't have to be welding full time. And so again, I hope that we can be an encouragement. I hope this doesn't come across that we have taken the wind out of your sail. But again, we have to watch the advice that we give. We don't want to give bad advice. We want to give the best advice that we possibly can. And again, just overall be an encouragement to you and your family and help you along this journey that you're going on. There's also brought up to point that, that we should talk a little bit more about, some do well that maybe shouldn't, or, you wouldn't think, I guess is where this gentleman's coming from, that you wouldn't think they're going to do well. And some do well. I'm sorry. And some do very poorly, and they should do well. Some guys struggle, and for years and years it seems like, and they're good guys and good girls, and they struggle for a long time. I don't necessarily want to jump in on the first one so far as those that do well that shouldn't, but I do want to address the ones that some do, really good guys struggle for years. And my best guess on that, if I were to put anything to that, would be maybe it's a lack of planning. I'm not saying it is. I'm not going to point fingers at anybody, but maybe it was a lack of planning. Looking back at Superior when I started it, one of the things I didn't do was really put together a good business plan. And so that's one of the things we're correcting, today, is we're putting together a better business plan, or a business plan. And there's a lot of things that I think we could have avoided, and it would have saved us some money had we done more planning than when we started. Now, we felt at the time that we did enough planning to jump out of the airplane with our parachute, hoping that it would open. And we did the best that we could. Now, looking back, we can definitely say we should have planned a little bit more. But I would be cautious that you can overanalyze, paralysis by overanalysis. You heard that saying all the time. So you can overanalyze things, and you could be stuck in that airplane waiting to jump out. And sometimes it might be better to jump out and just go for it. So some really good guys do struggle, and that's the fact of business. That's the fact of life. Again, I don't know what the answer is to that. I don't know to how to help you, except for just plan. Look at what you're doing and look at your numbers, and which was what we're going to get into now. Look at the numbers and figure out what you want to do. And so for the remainder of this episode, I want to share a few of the numbers and some of the things that helped us make the decision to jump into Superior full time. Obviously, that was a goal of mine. So today we've been technically in business about 9 years. And at the time of jumping, we were about 6 years in. So we've been full time, not quite 3 years. And, so I had some time under my belt, and honestly, Superior at that time ranged from a few $1,000s. I think our lowest was like $1,500 of income for the year. Again, we just were a hobby playing around, to ultimately about $50,000 or $60,000 so far as, gross income, not net profit. And so that made it a little bit easier for us, as things started to grow and we started taking things more serious and taking on bigger clients. We were able to look at things and be like, hey, we can make this work. And so what we did for ourselves anyway is we took our base expenses, like our payments, our medical care, our electricity bills, our house payment, all that stuff, and we added up the bare bones expenses. The number that we came up with for ourselves was $45,000 a year, is the amount that we needed to survive, to make our payments, to pay all our bills, to keep the lights on, to keep our kids fed, all that fun stuff. $45,000 was the number that we came up with, and that number might be different for you. You might be higher or lower. You just got to know what that number is. Don't jump into full-time in anything unless you know your bottom rate expenses. And so at the time, we were at a net profit of about $40,000. So it was pretty, I guess for us, it was a no-brainer. It's like, hey, let's make this jump. We definitely can make that work. And we had work, quote unquote, guaranteed over the next several months that would potentially add up to hundreds of thousands of dollars. At that time, we set goals for our annual income. My goal at that time was $300,000 a year. I figured if with this amount of income and this much markup and this much labor, we could not only clear the $45,000 but clear the business expenses and have a little bit of profit over. We were blessed to hit those numbers and exceed those numbers. And again, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to hit that number, and it doesn't mean you have to hit that number. Just have a number in mind of your yearly income, and again, your expenses that you have as well. And so you need to look at what you need to make. So I think the most important thing is you got to have income coming in the company, but you got to pay yourself first. And that was our number one thing that we did from the beginning. We always paid ourselves first, and it just makes things so much nicer as you move down the road. And so you got to look at the current job. So as I said, we were at a net profit of about $40,000 at that point in time. And we knew that we could hit, I think it was like $100,000 to $150,000 over the next several months or 6 months or whatever it was at that point in time, with a ultimate goal of $300,000 of income, which would give us a profit of about $100,000 to $150,000, depending on what we wanted to buy, and, the different sizes of jobs and what jobs actually came up. We can only theorize on some things. And again, not that you have to hit those numbers, but have some sort of numbers in mind, figure out what exactly you can make as a profit and what you can bring in as well. And so that really helped us. So we knew that at that point in time that, hey, I didn't have to have $1 million. We wanted to have, I think our ultimate goal was like $20,000 in our bank account for expenses. And I think we hit around half, or 15,000 or 17 or something to that effect before we actually made the jump. And we keep that, or actually we keep more than that now, in our accounts to have as a safety net in case something goes wrong or things start to dry up, so I have some safety so I can pay my bills as well. So look at your current jobs and forecast what you have as well. And so far as business expenses, so when I said, $45,000 was the number that we came up with to pay ourselves as a bare minimum. That's what we have to make, in a year's time to make our personal payments. We also took a look at our business expenses. Now, I don't remember all the numbers off the top of my head because, numbers change, and honestly, we've grown from that point, and our expenses are a lot higher to this day. I'm just going to pull $40,000 out of the year because that's about right, $30,000 to $40,000. Depending on how big you are and where you're at. Some of you might look at that and be like, man, it only cost me $5,000 a year. Doesn't matter what the number is, as long as you know what that number is. And so add that number. If it's $5,000 and you want to pay yourself $45,000, that's your base expenses, that's $50,000. So you got to make sure that you can clear $50,000 in that year's time to make it work. Again, it doesn't go back to, you having to have a bunch of money or, somebody working full time and all stuff. If that's what you want, that's great. And that's good. And so, maybe your insurance for your commercial insurance, your liability and all that stuff might be $1,000 a month. Maybe you have a truck payment. Maybe you have this or that. We did not have a lot of that stuff. So our house payment is very small. Our personal expenses aren't that much really. And I worked out of my garage for 2 years. So I had no lease payment. I had no multiple thousands of dollars payment for a huge facility. And so we were able to keep our costs down even to this day. We've been able to pay cash for everything that we've done moving forward, which has caused us to grow slow, but it's cash. And so I don't owe anything down the road. But in your case, you might have, a $1,000 a month payment. You might have a $10,000 a month payment, depending on how big you are or you want to be. You just got to look at that and say, hey, I'm part-time right now. With my side hustle there, I got a full-time job making X amount of dollars, and here's what's going to cost. Here's what I need to pay myself. Here's what first, and here's what I need to make to clear the business expenses. And again, those are going to go up. They can go down too. And again, you're just going to look at your own life. You're going to have to analyze what you want to do and come up with that number. Whether it's 50,000, 100,000, whatever it is, look at that number and make absolutely sure that you can make it work. And then look at your growth. What is your growth potential? And a lot of times that's hard to forecast, even for us today. And I'm not the expert at this whatsoever, but we continue to analyze the future and what is our potential growth. And so, maybe today your expenses is $20,000 a year for your business. And you might look ahead and say, well, if I can grow into certain niches or certain areas, maybe my expenses now go up to $40,000 or $100,000 or $400,000. I mean, you can really get your expenses up there pretty high, which, hopefully your profits reflect that as well. And so forecast ahead, if I focus in this direction, I'm going to hit this much money of expenses. I'll have this much money of income. Yes, we can make this work. No, we can't make this work. And honestly, look at your own life. Sit down with your spouse, sit down with your significant other and figure it out. Go through the numbers. Don't jump into this without looking at the numbers. Don't jump into it without considering the cost of doing business, because none of us wants to start a business, get a year or two down the road and be like, well, I didn't think of this, I didn't think of that. Things you should have thought of, not unforeseen things you should have thought of. And you end up having to fold it. And so those are some of the things, to keep this episode relatively short. I know this is a little bit longer than our normal 10-minute Stubby episode. But hopefully those numbers are a few things that can help you plug your life into those numbers, and go for it. Make the leap when you're ready and only when you're ready. I want to be an encouragement. Roy wants to be an encouragement. Jody wants to be an encouragement to you if you have a desire to quit your day job and do your side hustle, whether it be machining, welding, on-site welding, it could be anything. We want you to be successful in that. We don't want to encourage you to jump too soon. That's the biggest thing. We don't want you to jump too soon into something without first counting the cost. Hope that this episode can help. We'll see you on the next episode.
Well, that's it for this week's Stubby episode. Hopefully it answers a few questions if you're looking at jumping out on your own. And if you have any questions you'd like to hear answered here on the Stubbies, be sure to send them to WeldingTipsandTricksPodcast at gmail.com, and we'll catch you next time.